Good evening and greetings, everybody, to whichever part of the world that you join us from, or whichever part of the world that you finally catch up with us at. Good evening, Rajiv.
Good evening, Priyanka.
How
Great
have
to
you
be
been
back again.
today? Good to be back, but good looking forward to magical conversations.
Oh, wow. True, true, true. Magic all over today.
Magic all around with a magic wand, hopefully. So,
Yeah,
welcome to the
true.
OYF Show, a space that is being built for you so that you always have somebody to turn to. Conversations, power nuggets, studies, insights, toolkits, learning management system, and a lot more. Uh, look out for what we do, follow our work, please. And Rajiv, can you introduce the power nugget, please?
Sure, Priyanka. Well, as you said, it's about magical conversations. So let me begin today's Power Nugget by saying conversations are what allow people to create engaging and meaningful relationships with trust as its backbone. I think the power of conversations is sometimes underestimated. Everything in this world can be created, solved, nurtured through conversations. And today's OYF show is actually all about conversations. Conversations between men, conversations between women, conversations between men and women, and the journey that they go through to convert themselves into what we call as, what Priyanka said, magical conversation. And we have an amazing guest on the other side of a short video that will introduce the show. And we'll be just looking forward to introduce her and carry on our conversations. Over to you, Priyanka.
I'll introduce the show so that there's no more delay to the magic. Hello, Pauline.
Well,
Hello. Hello,
welcome,
Priyanka.
Pauline.
Hello,
This
Rajiv.
is our magical guest for the magical conversations, Dr. Pauline Crawford, all the way from Las Vegas. And let me tell you, my dear friends from across the world, she's been so kind that she's woken up early in the morning, 6:15, to be with us. So, first of all, Pauline, thanks a lot for your kindness. Thanks a lot for your effort. And thanks a lot for being with us on this amazing journey of magical conversations that you actually live. That's your purpose, that's your passion. So I'm so grateful to have you here on our show. Uh, Pauline, as she chooses to be called, and it's been very kind to allow us to call her Pauline,
Yes.
is is an amazing human being first who actually works in the area of gender dynamic intelligence. She is a mentor, she's a change maker. And I think I will leave the rest of the show for all of you to discover what more she is, because she is the woman who probably believes in the power of conversations and the power of magic through conversations. And I think I don't want to sort of waste any more time because I don't want to hold her back from allowing us to begin the conversations. And as we start that, and request Pauline to start off by telling us a little bit about her journey, what got her to become the flag bearer of magical conversations. Over to you, Pauline.
Oh, thank you so much. It's absolutely delightful to be here. And yes, I am awake. um, so, conversation has been my journey all my life. And as people might recognize with my accent that although I live in Las Vegas, I'm not American. So I hail from London, England, UK. And all my life, I've been engaged in conversations. So I think I want to start right at the beginning is that um, the British are renowned for their tea parties. And so as a child, I was always engaged in many family tea parties. You know, in the stage where children should be seen and not heard. You know that expression. But I would love the chatter of the conversation. And when I became a teenager, getting involved. But I always watched and observed how conversation would stutter. You know, there would always be one uncle who would hold the conversation to ransom. You know, he would suddenly say, "Oh yes, but," and then he would pontificate, and I was thinking, that's a shame because people are stopping listening. So I observed at an early age that when you had very fluid conversations, what I now call magical conversations, things really started flowing. And as I became a university student and I went into my first work situation, I became a conduit for everybody else. And it sounds like I was a busybody, but it wasn't that. It's just I was very much in the middle of the conversation. And I was in the middle of my family. So I was the third of four children. And there was always a lot of chatter, but I was always looking at all the different aspects of conversation, how they came together. And as I went on and got into my career later on, after I had my kids, I started working with people in the workplace. And I thought, yeah, conversations sometimes really stop and get blocked by very foolish things like, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And I think, well, that's stopping the conversation, not flowing the conversation. And it wasn't always between men and women, but I observed that men and women were different. Um, One of the things that I wanted to tell you was where the actual title came from, because I was obviously doing very well at this, not realizing that I could call it Magical Conversations. And my daughter, who was probably in her 20s at the time, said to me, you know, you should be the president of Magical Conversations. And I thought, what a cool title. I thought president was a bit grand, so I chose the ambassador. So I said, right, I'll be the ambassador of Magical Conversations. I'm a conversationalist. So I made a little business card, and all it said on it was Pauline CRAWFORD, the ambassador of Magical Conversations. I thought, I'll try this out. I think in life we should always test things out. So I tested it out on a women's group that I was attending. And I was so impressed because everybody said, oh, that's interesting, not knowing what it was. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So then I took it further. I took it to a network which was full of very serious lawyers, men and women. And one of my clients was a lawyer, she. And so she came over to me and said, oh, please meet my husband. And she turned to her husband and said, this is Pauline. She's the ambassador of Magical Conversations. And I have to admit, I thought, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. And he said, fantastic. It's exactly what we need in the law. So one of my propositions is that we should never make assumptions.
I think it's a very bold and daring assumption to make.
Very audacious.
Yeah.
But it
Yes.
is. And in my book, I talk about this, is, you know, that I said, I thank my daughter. And funny enough, she forgets the conversation, but I hadn't put that title to it, that magical. And some people react not like that. They go, oh, is it something spooky, you know? And I say, no, it's actually something very open-hearted and fun, but actually serious. So the idea with the magical conversation is it has no judgment and no assumptions, and it also has a sense of loving intentions. So it's not about being angry. And in fact, if you start a conversation with, well, I'm right and you're wrong, it can't be magical because you're
Yeah.
blocking the flow immediately. So I progressed this into the corporate workplace. And I think that's where the biggest assumption, even now, is I still get people in the last 2 years over COVID saying, oh, you can't take magical conversations into the boardrooms of the corporate world. And I say, why not? Because if you start saying you can't do something, you're blocking yourself before you even get there. So
Yeah.
as I said, it's all about an understanding, not just of the conversation, but the behavior behind the conversation. And why would some people block a conversation and other people allow it to flow? That's what we
So,
need to explore.
so I was having a conversation with somebody. In fact, this is so pertinent that you say it like that. I was having a conversation with somebody just yesterday, and this somebody he is a certified evaluator of some of the most comprehensive training programs that you would ever know of. and he's a psychologist in that training program for selection. And what he says is that a part of the exercise that we do when we are choosing candidates is that we'd give them a picture and give them 30 seconds or 4 minutes. Oh, so 30 seconds picture for and a 4 minute writing. And in that much, what they write, and then his work is around how what has been written and is it acceptable to the organization, yes or no.
Yeah.
So conversations and maybe how you express yourself is, I think, one of the oldest, and that's how I realize that it's one of the oldest form of understanding the background more than what meets the eye. So
Absolutely, and it's different to communication. Obviously there is
yes,
communication in a conversation, but communication can be anything. Communication can be one way, can be just a
yes,
statement. I need to tell you something, blah blah blah. A conversation, by the nature of the world, is circular. You can have a
right,
conversation with yourself. Obviously, there's those internal conversations, but the conversations with one or two or three or 100 people. So if you present to an audience, I believe you can still have a conversation with the audience.
So does that change across countries? I know your work spreads across the globe. I know you've worked in Africa and Malaysia and
Malaysia, yes.
some other countries. So would you like to tell us your experiences as how it changes from city to city, culture to culture?
Yes. I spent a lot of my life in the UK, worked in lots of different companies. So even company cultures are different. You go into the banking sector, you go into the pharmaceutical sector, you go into the hotel sector. There's a different energy to the conversations. And then you could go across countries. I remember once doing a tour across some European countries with Hewlett Packard. So you had a company culture, but a different city culture. And that was fascinating because there's subtle differences. And then in Malaysia and across the world now on Zoom. But the issue is that people are people. So as long as they understand your language, there's an interpretation going on. And what's fascinating is when I don't speak any other language than English. And in fact, living in America is fun because English and American is not the same. But that's an aside. But when I remember being on a train in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, and there was a lovely Indian lady actually who was pregnant who was sitting on the bench with me, and she didn't speak English, but we had an amazing conversation about her pregnancy because we did it all in sign language and body language. And my husband saying, what are you doing? I said, "Don't worry. It's a woman.
I'm having a
It's a
magical
woman
conversation.
It's a woman thing." But it's all about our intention to connect. So we might be
Yeah.
having conversations with children or adults or grandparents. With in Malaysia, it's a very set culture in terms of hierarchy in the government organizations that I worked in. And I think the thing is, you can have a conversation everywhere. You need to respect the culture that you're in at the time. But just remember
Yeah.
that people are people. We're all human beings, as you said. And all men are men and all women are women. And I know there are different sexual preferences, but what I work with is a complete map of humanity. So I would say when I show people my gender dynamics, everybody is somewhere. But people say, I'm not on your map. I say, I think you're alive. So you must be somewhere because we're, as you said, Ravi, we're all somewhere. And it's about understanding that difference and understanding the dynamics. So if you go somewhere where you've never been before, and I had never been to Malaysia, I'd never been to that part of the world, and I ended up living there for 4 years. And it was an amazing experience because it is very different to England and very different to America. And it's different to India. I've been to India a few times, but people are people. And that's really the essence of your willingness to be in the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so wonderfully described about the fact that people are people first, and the rest of them are layers on top of it. And actually, each layer uh, brings in another facet of the humanness of the person, as long as you start recognizing it with with a pair of glasses of acceptance. And I use that word quite often. And to me, acceptance becomes very important, because what is around you has a meaning if you're willing to accept it, right? As long as you're willing to accept it, everything around you becomes something that you're willing to deal with. But the moment you sort of wear the glasses of non-acceptance, whatever around you will suddenly diminish to something that you just don't want to be around. And whatever else you may try will sort of struggle. You'll start having both internal and external struggles with. So I think that is a very interesting, and
Yes.
that sort of gets me to a related point of what you just said. uh, and it'll be good to know your thoughts on that. Is we all live in a world of stereotypes, right? And those stereotypes are reality, right? Whether it's
Yes.
around men and women, whether it's around cultures, it's about whatever that we may want to call themselves are. Now, in your work, in the type of experiences that you've had, how do stereotypes really impact perceptions, and if it does at all, and what's been your experience around that?
Well, the whole concept of stereotypes is fascinating because obviously they can block conversation sometimes, but in many ways, stereotypes have occurred to help us feel safe. So that's something to be aware of. That um, it's like people say, "Oh, you mustn't label everything," and I say, "Well, if you go to the supermarket and nothing is labeled, you wouldn't know what's inside the tin." So it's about
Good one.
it's about So I've got white hair. Maybe that indicates that I'm older. Maybe it indicates I went and got my hair dyed. It's like, be okay with who you are and share it. So if you don't know something, the best thing to do is to be curious and to ask, oh, I'm fascinated about this culture. What happens here? How does it work? My first contract in Malaysia was actually with the Ministry of Women, and it was men and women, all were Muslim, and I'd never worked in a Muslim culture. And it was fascinating because I knew some of the protocols and the cultural conditions, and I honored that. But they were all men and women, and I started on that basis. I said, this is not about your culture. This is, to start with, this is about how do we understand each other. And they went, oh, that's good. I love that. And somebody said that, stereotypes are very important, and even natural biases. Now, some people might object to that. Biases that are negative and controlling are not good. So if we have a bias about a stereotype, oh, I don't like that kind of person because they are always X, Y, and Z, then we get into problems. But our natural biases is that we see the world from our sense of the world, and how we share that is important. So what I developed is archetypes, and those are not stereotypes. They are sort of sign markers. They're locations on the map that explain to us where we're starting from in order to be more of who we are in the company of everybody. So knowing who's at the table, at any table, is really important. And honoring them, respecting them, trusting them, liking them, enjoying their company, those are all things that we can all do if we choose. So if we choose to stay in our trauma of, as a woman, men have always treated me badly, therefore all men are bad. That's a very restrictive, negative bias. And it's all to do with the person, not the other people. So there were some very simple behavioral and, dare I say, essential physical, even, core things that we need to understand about how a human being works. And that's where, in many ways, it's about the dynamics in the room. So what we say now is that whichever gender you identify with impacts the dynamic of that conversation and hence the relationship. Does that make it important?
Yeah.
So whether you're a
Interesting.
man or a woman, or you're any sexual preference or any color or any generation, whatever you choose to be, remember it will make an impact on somebody else. So are you responsible for that impact being fruitful, joyful, exciting, or dramatic
Yeah.
and horrible and nasty? And I think I talk about energy angels and energy vampires. I bet you've met some energy vampires in your life.
Yeah.
Are they sitting
And
on the table behind you on the chart? And is that a chart that you want to talk about?
Oh, so I don't know whether anybody can see this, but I'll bring it a bit closer. But what it says is it's basically 360 degrees. So everybody in humanity, if they're alive, they're on this map. In fact, you could even put any spiritual connections on the map. But
Are the
basically,
vampires on the map also?
it's very simple complexity. Okay, so start with everybody's on the map somewhere. So that's simple. We're all human beings. We all live, we breathe, we react, we are proactive, reactive. We can enjoy the world. We can decide the world is nasty. We can do whatever we like, but we're on there. So we make an impact on other people. One of the things I look at is men. So on one side of the map, there's men. So if you like, this side of the circle is male. This side is female, biologically. But this part of the map here is masculine and this part is feminine. So you've got two energies crossing over. And this is really important because in the sense of yin and yang, we have masculine and feminine energies in us, in our bodies, in our world, in our experience. And yin is the softer element and yang is the stronger element. So with men, and this is very much evidenced over many, many famous people, more famous than me, Dr. John Gray, Barbara Ennis, many people have written about men are from Mars and women are from Venus, but I think there are two men from Mars and two women from Venus, okay? So the two men from Mars are the masculine one, so the one who fits up here, he's a ruler. So he's a man, but he's also got a lot of masculine energy. And his friend down here, he's a man, but he's got feminine energy, I call him the philosopher. So these two men are the masculine and feminine energy within men, the strong and the sensitive, the logic and the intuition. So when these two men get on, whatever culture, they represent the whole of man. And men are very important in our world. We don't want to get rid of them. We don't want to lose you, Rajiv. We need to be there with them because when you look at women, and we are circular, so the men are very straightforward in lines. The women are circular. We have hormonal, menstrual, we have a womb, we have ability to give birth, we are nurturers, but we also, some of us have masculine energy and some have feminine energy. So I'm a magician. I have fun here, but I've always been what I would call a masculine-minded woman. I was very good at mathematics. I was very good at structuring things. I've often stay in my head, but obviously my heart and my femaleness is core. And it's different to some of my sisters who are more feminine female, who have the beautiful awareness of nurturing everybody. They are extremely good business women. They look at detail in a different way to me. So understanding these two is really important because this is complexity and this is simplicity. I know, Rajiv, you will understand that. and often men will look at women as a collective and go, wow, they're wonderful, but I don't really understand what's going on there.
yeah.
So in very simple terms, men are very yes, no, either or, let's get this done. And women are, yeah, let's get this done. And let's have a lot of talk about it and bring everybody else in and sit around the fireplace and chatter. And women, the funniest one is, and I hope you recognize this, women ask questions that don't need answers. Have you come across that, Rajiv?
Yeah, I think that's well said, because And I think the rationale to that is that uh, what you very rightly said, they're very intuitive, they're very perceptive, right? And that energy reflects in their ability to sort of bring out that type of questioning. And also another side of it is sometimes no answer is enough to satisfy what a woman asks.
Yes.
So therefore one should recognize both sides of this pendulum, and accepting that, respecting it, and making sure that 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 role of an intuitive, perceptive uh, individual who is sort of able to generate uh, the right questions, not wanting an answer, and if given an answer has no value, is okay to be. And I think that's what makes it complex, right?
Well, that's
That's
right. And
reality.
I often find that my male clients say to me, well, okay, given that women will ask questions without wanting an answer, but some questions they do want an answer. So the
Yeah.
men say to me, well, how do I know the difference? I say, well, you just have to watch the body language and get tuned into, is this a question that needs an answer? And actually just ask, I mean, it's very simple. Actually say to a woman, is there a solution here I can help you with? No, 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 I'm working on it. Okay, that's fine. Yes, I would like you to help me. So sometimes we forget to say the obvious because we're so consumed with being who we are. And of course, in the business world, it's been very developed and controlled by men over the century. So we're in a shift change position now. And what I believe is happening is that women have risen from being not in business 100 years ago in the center where we are now, to really being fully present, being educated, being able to do business really well. And there's lots of evidence that women are extremely good, even in the serious corporate world. Um, but you have to ask the question, why is it then that there isn't half and half in the boardroom of every corporation in the world? It's because we're still trying to fight on the men's battle, and I don't think we do. I think this is a new game. This is a new game with a new map and new talents and new traits and new business. Business is no longer, it is tough, but it isn't it doesn't need to be highly competitive, beat everybody, kill the enemy, only make money. That's not the prevailing wind now. And that's my passion, is to find those companies that really understand that people, planet,
I
profit.
agree with you. I completely agree with you. Like, when you say, I call it a paradigm shift, I think I do relate work life with how
Yeah,
nature also designed work, and work for the male and the female. I think the female is the nurturer. So we can go crazy talking about lack of diversity and statistics around when women drop off from work life. So there are enough and more studies, and there are returnship programs, and we can all go crazy talking about it. But what cannot change in all of that is that the nurturer and the birth giver is the woman, and she is designed better to do that job. So
yeah,
when you say it very well, you say it, and it resonates with me, because I often say that the roles that have been defined by nature, let them be there. So now when we move forward, it's a good
yeah.
idea to kind of everybody contribute with their energy and their capabilities in a space which could be new and absolutely fresh, instead of trying to go back to a boardroom and fight a
Oh,
battle which is
yes.
already being fought.
Well, absolutely right. You see, the thing is that over the last century, we've said women must be in business, true, but we haven't changed the business plan. So I can understand why men would resist putting women in when we haven't organized what the game is. And it's a big
Yeah.
step. And that's where, COVID in many ways has been a blessing, because it stopped us in our tracks. And it said, okay, you're going to have to work differently. Now, we know that a lot of women have lost out during this period and have lost their jobs and they're marginalized. All of that needs conversations to change it. And what we need to do, I believe, is to look at the raw talent, the natural talent we have in any
Yeah.
collection of men or women, and to say,
Yeah.
wow, we need that talent. We need the sensitive guy. We need the one who's caring about people. We also need the tough guy who's going to make decisions and drive the action. We need a magician and the sovereign who are both going to nurture our business in a different way. The magician will be quite masculine in their head sometimes, and the sovereign will bring in that super caring of the planet, which we need. We've got to change our reference points, I think, in the collective, but we need to understand ourselves as individuals, because you can't throw people into a completely new plan without taking them on a journey.
Yeah, yeah. So you feel that the conversations around leadership and the recent experience with COVID and the pandemic has changed how conversations happen in your
I,
experience?
in some places, yes, and in other places, we're still in the dark ages. I mean, I was reading a report that McKinsey put out only last week, and is about marginalization of women, and the stats are against us. I mean, we're still not in pole position. We're not half and half. We're not equal, and in many places, women are treated quite badly still. But there are an awful lot of places where it's improving, and I know it's slow gain, and I want to speed it up, but I think there is enough percentage in the world that's saying, no, 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 we need the feminine power, we need the female power, we need men to understand what's going on. I think it will come from within the body of willingness to be more. And to be honest, the blocks are both from women and men to change. And that sometimes really upsets me, but we will work on that, because when you get into a magical conversation, there's no judgment. So you look at what's valued, what's the intention, what's the driver. So if everybody around the table says, well, we want enthusiastic, engaged, happy, healthy people, okay, if we all agree that, then we have to also look at what each of those individual archetypes need in that mission. And therefore, if the leaders don't listen, having set that mission, they're on a mission to disaster. They have to be inclusive. So it's a journey, it's a transition between where we were and where we're going to. But there's a definite feeling of the people I speak to and who are attracted to my work of, oh yes, we need that dialogue, we need that narrative, we need to understand all the individuals. And the wonderful thing is, when they get it right, they don't let go of it, because it's in here.
I think you bring out again a very interesting point, and I'll pick up from what you just said. It's in here, and the most difficult part is to get it there and get it started from there, right? And
Yes.
you started the conversation by talking about inner journey, right?
Yes.
And if I connect that path to inner journey and that feeling from within, it again goes back to self-realization, self-awareness, and the moving yourself into a position of action from inaction. Because you
Yes.
also use this word that the most difficult part in this journey is about accepting to act, whether it is men or it is women, right? Uh, the and that's true for not just this, but I think for everything. Uh, the biggest challenge that all of us as humans have is the resistance to change, and the
Yes.
resistance to accept the fact that I need to change. Because the easiest one to accept about change is that the other person in the world around me must change first, and then I will follow. So that's the easiest way out, and that's something all of us very conveniently go for. And we say, well, change, I'm willing to, but let the environment change first. Let people around me change first. I will do it for sure. But I'm a leader, by the way, right? That's another statement that people come back with in that case, right?
Yeah.
So I think there is always that sort of dichotomy in the mind and the heart, if I was to say. And that's always a challenge, and that's always something that struggles. At the moment that unison happens, transformation happens, change happens, acceptance happens. So I think that's bound to be there.
Yes.
I think what gets my attention based on what you just said is the fact that in this whole process, and as change becomes important, uh, what do you think really needs to change? What is it that must change for a balanced uh, framework to emerge? What's your view on that?
I ponder on that almost every day, because when I always say to people, when you get it right and you know it works, it doesn't mean that everything will be totally smooth. You'll still come across bumps in the road, but it's your willingness to know that you're on your journey. So I use a very simple philosophy with all of my clients, which I call value creation. And it's having a core principle that is nothing to do with who I am as that individual on the map. This is a philosophy. Comes from a very simple Buddhist philosophy, but it's universal. Is that the only thing that you can control or manage or have choices on is inside here. We do a lot of people think the external is controlling them, but there's always a choice. And we can read thousands of stories in the world about people who've been in diabolical situations and they've still smiled through a situation because they have that understanding that they're in control of their own choices. So if we understand that everything starts from me, then understanding my own value, my own faults as well, what are my upsides and downsides, whatever it is, I take that into every relationship. So it's a very simple three arrows going in a circle. The first one is me, and the second one is that dynamic with anybody else. It could be with my daughter, it could be with my colleague, it could be with you two, it could be with my husband, my dog. It's me and the other entity. So as I understand myself in that relationship. I have a son and a daughter. My relationship with them is different. I have a husband. I have two brothers and a sister. All those individual relations are just slightly different because of the way I see them and they see me. But collectively is the third arrow. So the external arrow, which most people think is controlling them, is actually what they take these relationships into. And people would say, oh, no, but, I can't change the government. I can't change the boss. I can't change the company. I say, yeah, but you have a choice to go into that situation with more understanding and a smile, an ability to assert yourself, which is not aggressive, to be audacious or curious or use your imagination, and the choice to walk away from a situation that's not working for you. But if you have this value cycle, the third arrow feeds back into your feeling of, oh, I did that. That worked this time. I heard, the boss heard me this time because I picked up a trick, a way of getting him to listen to me. So let me tell you a classic situation that happens with women and men, I believe, is in that boardroom or senior meeting or top meeting. And I'm in there as a woman, I'm really eager, I want to share my ideas. And the ruler boss says, no, it's not on the agenda. Okay, we're doing this. And I'm thinking, oh, he's so mean. He's not listening to me. He's not letting me have my say. So I stopped listening now to the rest of the meeting. Whereas in fact, his agenda was in that box, which said, I've got to get through this 1, 2, 3. I can't listen to that new idea which is coming in. So it's much better for the woman to understand he's got an agenda. If I listen to that agenda, there might be a point at which I can bring my idea in, rather than firing off some past history about men don't ever listen to me. And it goes both ways. I always say to my male clients, that person in the table that's trying to tell you this good idea might be a really good idea. But if it's not on your agenda, just say to her, I get the sense you've got something to tell me. Could you do it later, please? Okay, I'm on this agenda. Say the obvious. If people end up in a fight, then that's different. I always say it's not a magical conversation if you're fighting. A magical conversation is seeding new ideas, new creativity, and new understanding. So I think that value cycle is important because if she has enough understanding of her own talents, but understands that he has this agenda, she sits at the table understanding the complete cycle, and that when she gets a good value out of it, it increases her energy and also her presence with him. So the value cycle creates value for everybody, but it starts with me.
Yeah.
So that's going back to your point, Ravi. It's like many times it can still happen even when you're super confident. You still get moments which you weren't expecting a comment that comes across the table. First, take responsibility, accountability for how is that impacting me and how is my impact coming back. And don't allow your inner voice to scupper you, your inner voice that says, he's not listening to me, therefore I'm not valuable. You have to, that's where you have that internal magical conversation saying, no, it's okay. It's okay. Because nobody else hears that conversation and you keep smiling. Oh, thank you, Mr. Boss. Yes, okay. I'll just wait and listen and see if I can find the right place to come in.
So I want to highlight the title, and I'm going to read this off the board, like quite literally. Gender Dynamics Intelligence is how Pauline titles her work. So do you, so what we just discussed was probably a good example of how that comes alive. Is there any personal experience that you would love to share with us, or is there something that reminds you and brings a smile?
Well, there's so many personal experiences. I think the most important thing for people to realize is that life is a continuous journey. So you don't get this right and then just say, I always get it right. No, there are still moments when something turns up that you don't know. But there are some little there's some little tricks. I want to share one with you because I actually only learned this when I was into this. If as a woman you have a challenge with a man, and this might be in the workplace or it could be familial, whatever, and you want to, in a way, tackle something, you want to bring something up, do not sit opposite him. Sit beside him. I don't know whether you've ever come across this. And I tested this out actually with my son. It was quite interesting because we were going backwards and forwards about something, but we were sitting in the car and I realized it was much easier to have a kind of an affirmative conversation when you're not eyeball to eyeball. Because to be honest, and I don't know whether you agree with me, Rajiv, but men feel threatened. Now with a woman, it is actually important to be in eye contact, so it's different. Because a woman feels more offended if you having a, and I don't mean an angry conversation, but something where you want to make some clarity, and you might actually say, I've observed lately that things have been a bit tense. Would it be okay to share something with you? So you preempt the conversation. In that situation, you go eyeball to eyeball with a woman, but you don't go eyeball to eyeball with a man. A man feels more able to deal with it. So you would sit at a table next to him and have a piece of paper.
I want to ask you, how do you deal with women? I think one of my other questions would be, how do you deal with women in a tough conversation?
Well, I think you have what you need to remember is that the conversation is in the space between you. So picture it in the space between you. What happens when we get into a tense or a slightly conflict situation is that we feel either very vulnerable or very, dare I say,
Willing to hit back.
We can get quite spiteful as women, and I mean that with love, but it's because we know at the core that we're the same. So by asking permission for somebody to share an observation, and you'll share an observation about what's in the space between you. So by saying to somebody, I observed that somehow last few times we met, it's been rather tense, and I feel that I'm not sharing with you how I feel. May I share that? So almost it sounds static, but we need to preempt them. Because the challenge with conflict is if we go in straight to the belly, we get into a fight. Now, men deal with this in a slightly different way. I think you might share, Ravi, but men generally, because they're more yes, no, either or, they're more confrontation with each other and they're more okay with that. So men can often face up eyeball to eyeball and have quite a strong conversation and still say, okay, mate, that's sorted, let's go out and play golf. Now the magical conversation is between you, it's in the space. So you imagine you're inviting somebody to share their view of the tension between us. Does that make sense? It's a different technique. So in fact, in a constructed magical conversation with clients, with anybody, you create a circle. Obviously that's slightly different on Zoom, but you're creating a circle in which everybody can share their view about the topic at hand. And by asking everybody to share without judgment, what you're asking them to do is share their experience. So the topic is sitting in the middle of the circle. And you might even hear something that you sort of think, well, I don't know that I agree with that. But you don't go in and say, oh, I don't agree with that. You might say, well, that's an interesting experience of that topic. So it's a different approach. It's in behavioral terms, it's more gestalt. It's saying, well, in my experience of collaboration, this is how I see it. Or in my experience of leadership, this is how I've experienced it. And you're seeding the ground. It's like having a fertile field. You're planting all these seeds. And then you're exploring which ones might be growing into the leadership tree.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, the way you describe it, like a fertile ground, and the fact that it's important to sort of allow it to sort of evolve. Uh, just one thought, especially given the times that we are in today. Uh, this framework that you're referring to about conversations, about gender dynamics intelligence, whether magical conversations, uh, how does it sort of get impacted with the COVID era of work culture, of hybrid working, online working? Does something change in it? What's been your experience on that part of it?
Well, I think there's an interesting shift is that some people can hide behind the Zoom screen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because if you're attempting a magical conversation on screen, you really need to have the camera on. It's very difficult to have some people with the camera on, some people with only auditory. There is something about being able to see each other. And literally, if you do a face-to-face one pre-COVID, and hopefully we will get to it again, you're sitting in a circle. You are actually watching everybody because you're experiencing their body language. But I think we can still have, as you notice, I use my hands a lot, but we can still feel the energy. So, I mean, I could sit here and talk in a very flat voice and then you wouldn't hear anything and then blah, 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 blah. But we can energize our conversation on screen and in workplace. So I believe the future is going to be more hybrid. I think we'll probably have more situations where we're meeting people again, but we've got so used to our screen presence. I think that's okay. One can get very intimate with somebody and you can still ask those questions. Ask permission, ask, in my observation, in my experience, what we're doing is we're owning the experience into the space of the conversation and we're listening to the other person's experience. So we have to acknowledge that. And as I say, even if we didn't totally agree with somebody, we might say, well, I hear what you say. That's a very interesting experience. It's different to mine, and that's interesting as well. And it's like making a cake. You're mixing the ingredients together and allowing it to bake. And you're not going in for the jugular. You're not going in saying, okay, enough conversation.
Yeah.
So let's take up that a little more. I'll ask you my last question. It's been a fantastic conversation, which I wish was not finishing anytime soon. We keep it alive. We call it accountability partnerships. Your thoughts on building between men and women, accountability partnership? And can that be done better with a conversation?
Um, or how can men and women understand each other?
Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting because when we do an introduction, it's very important to have men and women in the room. But sometimes it's important to do a deep dive for women only to really understand what's happening on their side of the map. And then for men only to understand what's happening on their side of the map. But for both parties, without the others in the room, to know something about them so that when they meet, there can be some aha moments together in the room. And I've seen this work when I've had roomfuls of clients, and obviously on Zoom you can do breakout rooms. If you take all the men into one room and all the women into the other room and you ask them exactly the same question, the content is one part of it, but the other is the style. So you'll find that men are much more, oh, well, it's either this or this or this or this, or it's in this box. And the women are going, oh, it's all of this and this and this and this. So,
But you do recommend that they be segregated by their gender association. You do recommend that as a practice.
sorry,
I said you do recommend that as a practice where you do segregate people
I,
according to the
I do
gender they
recommend
identify with.
one step in the process. It's about making a singularity out of diversity. So what I mean by that is if you were deep diving into how do women work, how do women think, then I'd have only women in the room. How do men work? But if you're looking at men and women, I might
Yeah.
have the same level of. So if I had all leaders, I wouldn't mind having men and women in the room. But you've got so many complex um, issues sometimes. If you have too many diversities in the room and you start talking about gender dynamics, you'll get too many backstories, if you like.
Yeah.
But the lovely thing is, and this is my dream, is that if you were given a map of India and it would help you drive around India, if you didn't know that before, you would crash. If once you've got the map, you don't crash. So my dream is that the men and the women have the same map. So once they start exploring it together, they go, oh, I recognize you came from that journey, didn't you? And I came from this journey, and he came from that journey. But when we meet in the middle, we've got out of our cars and we're sitting around the table, but we have the knowledge of the journey, and we're creating a new business scenario which honors logic and intuition. It honors strong and soft. It honors caring and providing. You know, there's mixtures of things that I think we need to put into business. And I have a dream that we could put intuition alongside accountability on the bottom line on the P&L. And the company chief says, oh, and actually put a value about it, you know, that, well, we made X thousands more because we used our intuition. And there is evidence out there of that. I heard one story quickly. It was a company, and at the beginning of COVID, everything was going pear-shaped. And the senior guy said, I will reduce my salary. Will you reduce your salaries to everybody in this company? They all agreed. They all reduced their salaries. But it was such a good culture. They continued to work well together. They honored men and women, all the conversations. At the end of the day, they made more money in the next 6 months than they had in the previous 6 months.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely. No, and I think it's so wonderful the way you describe this. I'll just take a few moments to sort of
Yes. Yeah.
summarize some of these
Yes.
pieces around. And you spoke about accountability and intuition being part of the bottom line, and that's a very interesting comment that you made about it. And I'll just go back to a few comments that appeared through the conversations that we've had. Uh, and somewhere you said accountability finally starts with me as the individual, whether I'm a man, I'm a woman. So I think so. The buck stops at me. I think that's a very important
Yes.
message that you sort of talk about here. And I'll just also just uh, try and sort of articulate what you just described about the three phases. And I've spoken to you offline about this also, but I'll just sort of try and summarize this here about the work that I do around accountability partnerships, which is AD. where there is a stage of awareness, and that's referring to the first stage that you talk about, that the men and the women individually need to be aware about themselves, the deep dive that is important, so that with that awareness, when they move to the next stage of discovering the collective power of the conversations that they can have, that's what gets them to the stage of discovery. So being aware, being getting to discovery, and being ready to deliver a world order which is more equitable, which is more solution oriented, which is more conversational, which is more realistic. And I think the realistic is a word that comes to me at this point in time, because the real world is actually that, where men and women are not differentiated because they are men and women, but they are respected for who they are, and they
Yes.
go through this journey of awareness as individuals, are respected as individuals, and collectively can discover the power of the collective wisdom and capabilities they bring to the table, and then deliver value both to the business, to the families, to the relationships, and anything they maintain. And that's actually the essence of accountability partnerships. You're
Yes.
accountable to yourself, you're accountable to the other person, and you're accountable to society. And I think that's what probably is so important in this. So it just sort of came to me. I thought I must share this. It's just been amazing. Magical is the word for this conversation.
Magical is the
Thanks.
word.
Thanks, Priyanka.
Pauline, never have I had a guest who has been able to articulate her thought. I like to work with communication. And I have not had somebody articulate that thought with such precision and such fantastic visualization. So even if I was like not paying attention, I'll remember your table, I'll remember the women and that their circles and the strong men and the feminine side of men, to keep it politically right, and that together they form the masculine section, which is one side of the table. Never will I forget. I think it's a fantastic feat of not just gender diversity, as you describe your work, but it's also a fantastic example of visualization. So thank you so much
Thank you.
for doing the work that you do, and it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, both of you, for summarizing it so well as well. And together we can make a difference in this world. That's the thing that I think that men and women just don't understand when they fight about things, that we've got a big world to change and to make our economies safe and our homes safe. And we can do that all in the same motion in a magical conversation.
Absolutely. I'm sure the magic is just
Absolutely.
starting to unfold. I'm sure
Yes.
about that.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll just
Thank
end the
you.
broadcast
Thank
now.
you.
So we'll close the broadcast and we can